Opening lines with the English becomes a flexible way to steer the game towards strategic maneuvering and space advantage. Immediately stakes central territory, creating a symmetrical pawn structure that promises dynamic play for both sides. Developing the knight here aims for central influence and prepares for swift kingside action, subtly challenging black's pawn structure. Slightly passive, it concedes central control and prepares for a fianchetto, potentially allowing white a more comfortable space advantage. Preparing kingside fianchetto for a flexible pawn structure and potential rook lift. Unlocking piece mobility, this knight immediately contests the center and supports a potential Nf6 follow-up. Developing the bishop to a powerful diagonal, setting up for potential kingside expansion and control of the center. Developing the knight towards the center, this piece eyes the d5 square, subtly contesting white's proposed kingside pawn advance and preparing for potential kingside castling. Solidifying the center and preparing for potential pawn pushes like e4 or a more measured development. This maneuver prepares for an eventual fianchetto, aiming to control the long diagonal and establish solid central control without immediate pawn clashes. Boldly embracing open lines, white aggressively contests the center, potentially igniting sharp tactical play and leaving his king with some exposure. Developing the bishop to its ideal diagonal prepares for castling and reinforces central control. Developing the knight to f3 further cements control over the central squares, preparing for potential pawn pushes and reinforcing the kingside. Securing the monarch in the Catalan structure is a sound positional decision, preparing for potential central pawn advances or flank action. Castling locks down the king's safety, preparing for central action and freeing the rooks for the game's unfolding drama. Breaking the central pawn chain, black opens the f-file for potential pressure, a dynamic shift after the queenside expansion. Capturing the pawn opens the bishop's diagonal and prepares central pressure. Developing the bishop to an active square pins the knight and creates immediate tactical possibilities. Developing the queen to d2 facilitates potential kingside pawn storms and prepares for central pawn advances. Bringing the rook to the open file now initiates pressure on the d-file, a proactive move. Consolidating the center, this repositions the rook to an active file, preparing for potential central breakthroughs and enhancing piece coordination. Preparing to unblock the queenside, this rook anchors itself to a potentially open file, aiming to influence the center indirectly. Seeking to unravel black's solid setup, this bishop repositions, probing for weaknesses and potentially opening lines for attack. Discarding the bishop clears the way for a centralized pawn thrust and opens the h-file towards white's uncastled king. Recapturing the bishop clarifies the center and aims to exploit the now open kingside for attacking chances. A bold leap into the opponent's camp, this knight aims to disrupt white's harmonious development and potentially pry open the kingside. Aggressively centralizing the queen now, seeking to exploit black's slightly passive pawn structure and potential weaknesses around the king. Asserting space on the kingside, black preempts a potential g4 pawn push, while subtly preparing the knight's redeployment for future central influence. Sacrificing the bishop opens lines toward the castled king, creating immediate tactical chances. Accepting the knight's sacrifice decisively clarifies black's king's safety, but opens the e-file for immediate pressure. Unleashing a devastating attack, this queen sortie seizes a vital pawn and directly threatens the beleaguered black king. An intriguing attempt to break open the queenside, hoping to exploit the g-file's exposure. Watch for counterplay on the d-file. Securing the king's flight square is a sound defensive maneuver, anticipating potential threats along the h-file. Reconnecting the rooks and preparing for a potential pawn push seems like a cautious but reasonable defensive maneuver on an already complicated board. Reasserting pressure on the queenside aims to control the open c-file and prepare a kingside advance, forcing black to defend carefully. Securing the king's egress route with this pawn advance is a prudent measure, anticipating future kingside activity and reinforcing the defensive pawn structure. Securing the queenside pawn structure reinforces white's territorial advantage. Reclaiming the queen from its passive corner post and preparing for potential central activity offers a dynamic shift. Cracking open the kingside center, this advance seizes critical d-file control and threatens to unravel black's pawn structure. Attempting to disrupt white's central control by forking pieces, this maneuver sacrifices tempo for dubious tactical potential. Probing deeply into the center, this thrust ignites a fierce struggle for control and opens fresh avenues for attacking the isolated black king. The queen's dive into the king's flank creates immediate tactical fireworks and a severe vulnerability for black's monarch. Consolidating the monarch behind pawn defenses, prioritizing king's safety amidst the ongoing positional skirmish. Unleashing the rook to the open file offers a dynamic counterplay, seeking to disrupt white's central control and exploit potential weaknesses around the enemy king. Repositioning the rook to eye the kingside from a safer distance offers improved defensive potential. Unleashing a pawn thrust into the center aims to disrupt white's pawn chain and create attacking opportunities on the queenside. Initiating a central pawn break, white aims to disrupt black's king safety and open lines for attack. Finally, a pawn exchange that alleviates some central congestion and opens a diagonal for the queen. Unlocking the knight's potential, this advance threatens disruption and opens avenues for further piece activity. Liberating the knight creates an immediate pawn structure imbalance. Prepare for a dynamic middle game. Eliminating the knight seizes control of the crucial d5 square and exposes black's king. Reclaiming the material imbalance, black aims to simplify and exploit the compromised white kingside pawn structure, hoping to neutralize white's attacking potential. Opening the c-file aggressively disrupts black's queenside pawn structure and seeks to exploit weaknesses. Sacrificing the exchange to activate the rook and create counterplay along the opened files. A stunning check, aiming to shatter black's precarious pawn structure and expose the weakened king. Sensing a lost cause, black retreats the rook, abandoning the central tension to white's dominant queen and pawn. Seizing the open file, white aims to unravel black's weakened kingside pawn structure, a bold gambit for initiative. Sacrificing material to open lines for your queen is a bold but risky gambit to chase down the enemy monarch. Regaining the queen by force unravels black's defenses and forces a decisive material exchange. Finally, the black king is unchained, though its escape route through the center is still perilous. The rook now eyes the king's flank, seeking to exploit black's compromised pawn structure. The black king's flight path is suddenly exposed by this daring sortie. Solidifying the monarch's sanctuary after the turbulent exchange proves prudent, preventing further immediate checks and securing a more stable position. Abandoning the defense of that pawn, black prepares to reposition their rook, eyeing the open queenside and aiming for counterplay. Slashing the pawn chain opens a vital diagonal for the queen's influence. Sensing an opportunity, black boldly gambits a pawn to activate the queen, aiming to disrupt white's nascent kingside initiative and create counterplay. Pivoting the rook to the d-file shores up weaknesses and prepares for a potential exchange that could simplify into a more favorable endgame. Securing the central king in the face of a reinforced d-file pawn is crucial for survival. A subtle repositioning, the white king retreats, anticipating potential checks and securing a safer haven. Securing the queenside pawns against further incursions consolidates black's defenses. Unlocking the c-file aims to exploit the exposed black king and pressure the weak pawn structure. Protecting the king's escape route, this prepares to regroup the pieces and resist further pressure. Unleashing the rook to the 7th rank injects significant pressure on black's queenside defenses, threatening to dismantle their structure. Challenging the rook's placement on the 7th rank, this counterplay aims to disrupt white's control and explore the open files. The queen vacates the h5 square, preparing to exploit the weakened kingside and create new attacking avenues. Trading queens here simplifies the position, potentially leading to an endgame where white's passed pawn on d6 becomes a significant threat. Exposing the king now opens a precarious path for white's monarch. Securing the king's long-term safety in this endgame is paramount, as the opponent's rook now controls the 7th rank. Capturing the pawn creates a dangerous open file for your rook and further isolates black's king. The rook finally contests the open file, aiming to disrupt white's queenside pawn structure and prevent further king infiltration. A decisive pawn push, activating the queenside threat and forcing black's hand. Shifting the king towards the queenside might seem passive, but it prepares to contest the open d-file and support the rook's eventual advance. The king scrambles for safety, a necessary retreat from the looming threats. Transitioning to a pawn-heavy endgame, the king bravely steps forward to join the skirmish. Centralizing the monarch unlocks vital attacking squares and prepares for the inevitable pawn race. Black repositions the king to the center, aiming to support the d-pawn's advance and prepare for potential pawn pushes. Stepping forward with the monarch offers a chance to finally centralize and exert influence. The rook's journey to the 7th rank opens up attacking possibilities on the kingside, though it risks becoming a target itself. Securing the queenside expansion with a pawn advance aims to gain territorial advantage and potentially create a passed pawn later. Snatching the pawn now is a risky gambit, trading material for a desperate attempt to disrupt white's advancing king. Solidifying the passed pawn's advance with an eye on perpetual check possibilities. Relinquishing the central file allows the white king to approach, forcing black to defend passively. Promoting to a queen is the inevitable conclusion, sealing the victory and overwhelming black's remaining defenses. The king's exposed position now grants the opponent's queen significant hunting opportunities in the endgame. Pawn promotion is now imminent, forcing a precise response from black to avert disaster. The rook now boldly challenges the recently promoted queen's territorial claim. King centralization is paramount. Bringing the monarch into the fray offers crucial support for your pawns. Unleashing the rook to a powerful outpost, black ignites a final desperate attempt to stir up complications in this losing endgame. Unleashing the rook's power, a decisive check to corner the king and force a swift endgame victory. King is desperately seeking shelter from the rook's persistent harassment as the pawn promotion looms large. Securing the 7th rank with the rook prevents black's king from finding safety there and establishes dominance over the open file. Snatching the rook with the king invites a check, but it's a necessary gamble to prevent being cornered. Seizing the open file, the monarch advances to shepherd the pawn's final push for promotion. The rook's sortie to the 4th rank immediately creates a dangerous discovered attack threat on white's king, forcing a defensive reaction. Capturing the pawn simplifies to a winning rook endgame, securing the advantage. The rook now has excellent outpost potential, eyeing the king's weakened defenses and aiming to disrupt white's passed pawn push. Forcing a decisive rook exchange opens a clear path to victory by activating the king. A bold gamble to snatch a pawn, but it leaves the king exposed and the rook on the 7th rank vulnerable to attack. Pressing the attack with pawn promotion and space gains, anticipating black's king's final stand.